changed.
Let me just bring in Marwan Arsalan, who's joining us in Washington, D.C. Arsalan, what did you think about the tone of the speech and listening to what Marwan said there about praising each of Trump's paragraphs in his speech with, "I used to think," and now, lo and behold, I think differently?
Well, I don't think that he does think differently. I think that all Donald Trump's speech proved today is that he can read off of a teleprompter without having a meltdown and going off script. Let's not forget that this is a man who once said that I think that Islam hates us, as though Islam, a religion of 1,400 years, was a singular person who stole his lunch money in high school. He has also completely continued to back his Muslim travel ban. You know, he surrounds himself with people like Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon and Sebastian Gorka, who are known Islamophobes. Just because he didn't use the term radical Islamic terror in today's speech in Saudi Arabia, which it would have been politically stupid to do, I don't think that it's a turnaround at all. And I think that once Donald Trump comes back stateside, we'll see the two-faced Donald Trump that we have seen from the beginning.
Arsalan and Marwan, I'm going to bring in just now a quote from Donald Trump when he was on the campaign trail so that we can just get some idea of what sort of a turnaround it is we're talking about.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
I want surveillance of certain mosques, okay? If that's okay. But database is okay, and watch list is okay, and surveillance is okay. If you don't mind, I want to surveil.
So Marwan, is what we're talking about here that Trump is the ultimate pragmatist?
Yes, but more than that, you see, and this is where a lot of the confusion is taking place, including with your guest from Washington, is that there's a lack of understanding of the difference between the person and the position, between the president and the presidency, between Trump, the campaigner, the populist, the business tycoon, and the president of the United States. The people who are there sitting in that conference in Riyadh were not listening to the business tycoon who used to want to win a presidency. They are sitting with the president of the United States. That's the most important superpower in the world today. And what the president of the United States says, you know, with the Pentagon behind him, with the, of course, with America's financial power and other powers behind him, he needs to be listened to. Now, there is a change. Anyone who cannot say the change is blind and deaf. The change is from what we just heard earlier, a complete, total, utter hostility towards Islam and Muslims, to dancing with the sword with some of the most important Muslim leaders in the world today. How did that happen? Now, we could explain the mystery. For example, $400 billion trade deal, the biggest engagement, the most expensive engagement in recent times, probably in all times. The fact that President Trump could sell Saudi Arabia $110 billion worth of arms, more than the totality of all arms sales to Saudi Arabia in half a century. So we could explain that there is a turnaround and that this Donald Trump, the President of the United States, wants to work with America's traditional allies, which happen, most of them in this region are Muslims, Muslim leaders, who do want to work with the United States to eradicate terrorism, as it were, and who do want to work with him against Iran and the likes, and they will have to find common language. So President Trump came to Saudi Arabia to say, look, I understand that 95% of the victims are Muslims and that we need to work together. I'm not going to preach to you about how you need to worship your God. I'm not going to do this and the other thing, but we have mutual interests, $400 billion at least, and we have common security interests. And I think that's where probably the conversation is going to start from here onward.
Arsalan, bringing you back in, I wonder what you make of what Marwan just said there, but also about how you think that this is going to play out with Muslims in the rest of the world, but in the US as well. Are they going to be skeptical about what they're hearing, this so-called turnaround?
Well, first of all, Julie, I've lived in Washington, D.C. my entire professional career, and I have dealt with American politics my entire professional career. And you cannot remove a politician's rhetoric from the campaign just because it happens to suit what you're looking for him to say right now. You know, we always talk about politicians' inconsistencies. Again, Donald Trump said that there should be a complete shutdown of Muslims from coming into the United States. If you replace Muslims with Jewish people or any other group and you sound like a neo-Nazi, you probably shouldn't say it. And again, he would be an utter fool to walk into Saudi Arabia, the site of the two holy mosques in Mecca and Medina, and spit in the face of his hosts there. So of course he's going to have a pivot in terms of his rhetoric. But again, if you look at his entire presidency thus far, he has been completely two-faced in everything that he has said. And the moment that he steps back in front of the United States, he is going to enter back into his jingoistic, nationalistic, populist rage. And that's something that, has to be called out here.
Marwan, just bringing you in finally, what else was said in the speech that we should pay attention to? It struck me that there was very much the turning to the gaze towards Iran. There was also talk about Hamas and how he views them. And that strikes me that is going to be quite unhelpful later on in his visit.
It's very helpful for him going to Israel. It's not helpful for him to go into Bethlehem. It's not helpful for him necessarily among a lot of those who were attending the conference there. So I think there is a language there that is going to have to bridge into his visit tomorrow to Israel. There's no doubt about that. Although apparently a lot of Israelis are angry with him for his visit to Saudi Arabia. Be that as it may, why did Trump choose to go to Saudi Arabia? He didn't have to go to Saudi Arabia in his first visit outside the United States. He chose to do so because as a pragmatist, two-faced or not, he is more than happy now to go to Saudi Arabia, change his rhetoric about Islam and so on and so forth, make a big trade deal with Saudi Arabia, cement relations with America's traditional allies, including Egypt, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, and others, and try to relaunch America's intervention in the Middle East under the pretext of hostility towards Iran by demonizing Iran, and so on and so forth. So there's a certain rationale here. Now, I think one of the important things that we need to pay attention to is that a president is part of a presidency. And the presidency of the United States is not just Steve Bannon and Steve Miller, those who think of Islam as some sort of a fascist phenomena, but there are also the oil interests. There is the Pentagon and its three prominent generals, McMaster, Kelly, and Mattis, who are very influential in this administration. There's the Washington establishment in general, the Republican establishment in general, and all of those are part and parcel of where this presidency is moving forward. Now, of course, President Trump can take credit for a lot of things. He cannot take credit for this speech because I don't think he has neither the rhetorical capacity nor necessarily the knowledge about Islam to step into this, volatile field and express himself. So certainly he's getting help from a lot of people around him, notably from the establishment, because I think for him to cement and to draw a roadmap for American policy in the Middle East moving forward, he needs all of those power centers in Washington as well as in the Middle East.
Marwan Bashar joining me in the studio. Thank you. And Arsalan Iftikhar, our human rights lawyer from Washington, D.C. Thanks to you both.